The morning sun glimmered on the glass walls of the five-star Grand Monarch Hotel, one of the city's most prestigious establishments. A man in simple clothes, plain gray trousers, a white shirt, and worn-out shoes, walked slowly toward the front door. No one recognized him as Ethan Walker, the billionaire owner of the very hotel he was about to enter. Today, Ethan wasn't coming as the boss. He was coming as an undercover guest, determined to test how his staff treated ordinary people. He had recently received letters from guests complaining of arrogance and discrimination by the employees. Now, he wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. Carrying only a small bag and a calm smile, he approached the front desk and politely said, "Good morning. I'd like to book a room for one night." The receptionist, a woman in her early 30s, glanced at him from head to toe and frowned. "We're fully booked," she said coldly without checking the system. Ethan remained composed. "Maybe a smaller room. I can pay up front." She sighed, rolled her eyes, and muttered, "Sir, this is a luxury hotel. Try somewhere else." Her tone stung more than her words. He looked around and noticed several well-dressed guests being welcomed with smiles, champagne, and bows. But for him, just scorn. The bellboy smirked and whispered, "These types always walk in from the streets thinking they belong here." Ethan simply nodded and stepped aside. He didn't want to reveal his identity yet. He sat quietly in a corner of the lobby, but soon a security guard walked up and said, "Excuse me, sir, you can't sit here unless you're a guest." Ethan asked gently, "Can I just rest for a minute?" The guard crossed his arms. "No, sir. Please step outside." With quiet dignity, Ethan stood up and walked toward the glass doors, the whispers of laughter echoing behind him. Every moment, every insult, he absorbed it in silence, not as a billionaire, but as a man observing the real face of his empire. Outside, he stood under the golden hotel sign, watching the staff through the glass. He saw how quickly their behavior changed when a luxury car pulled up. Suddenly, the same receptionist who had dismissed him earlier was all smiles, offering towels and drinks to a rich-looking couple. So that's what service looks like. Only when they see money, Ethan thought to himself. A black car soon pulled up beside him. The driver stepped out, slightly nervous. "Sir, did you get the footage?" Ethan nodded. A tiny camera hidden in his shirt button had recorded everything. He looked once more at the hotel entrance and said, "Let's go." They've just written their own ending. 20 minutes later, the hotel lobby buzzed with chatter as the staff prepared for a special inspection. They had received word that the company's CEO was visiting one of the chain's branches that day. But they didn't know which one. The receptionist hurried to fix her hair. The manager adjusted his tie nervously. Suddenly, the same man they had thrown out walked back through the door, but this time, he was wearing a tailored black suit. His confident walk silenced the entire room. Every head turned as he stopped at the reception desk, looked directly into the receptionist's eyes, and said, "I'd like to check in now." She froze. "Sir?" Her voice trembled. Ethan smiled slightly. "Don't worry, you'll remember me soon." Within seconds, the general manager rushed forward, his face pale. "Mr. Walker, sir, I didn't realize—" Ethan raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "Please," he said softly, "call all your staff here. I'd like to have a word with everyone." Confused whispers filled the lobby. Housekeepers, receptionists, and waiters all gathered in a nervous circle. Cameras from Ethan's security team started rolling. He pulled out his phone and played a video, the footage of himself being insulted and thrown out earlier. The entire staff watched in horror as their own voices echoed through the speakers. "Try somewhere else. You don't belong here." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's calm voice broke the silence. "This is how you treat a guest. A man who simply wanted to stay the night." No one answered. The receptionist had tears in her eyes. The security guard stared at the floor. The manager began stammering excuses. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. We thought you were—" Ethan interrupted, his voice cold but controlled. "Poor, unimportant? Beneath you?" The words hit like thunder. Hospitality isn't about judging who's rich or who's not. It's about respect, something this hotel seems to have lost. He walked toward the center of the lobby. "Do you know what's ironic?" he said, his tone calm yet sharp. "This hotel was built to give everyone an equal experience. whether a billionaire or a student saving for a night of comfort. He looked directly at the manager. And now? You've turned it into a temple for vanity. The staff stood motionless, hearts pounding. Outside, guests began gathering to see what was happening. Some even recorded the scene through the glass. Ethan turned to his driver and nodded slightly. Within minutes, 2 corporate inspectors walked in with folders in hand. Ethan said, "Please proceed." One of them began reading a list. Multiple guest complaints over the past 6 months. Mismanagement of customer service. Discrimination reports. The manager's face turned white. The receptionist sobbed quietly. Ethan looked at them one last time and said, "You didn't know I was watching. That's what makes this real." He paused, his voice steady but heavy. "You're all terminated. Effective immediately." The announcement sent shockwaves through the hall. Gasps, whispers, and tears filled the air. One young housekeeper fell to her knees, begging for another chance. Ethan looked at her kindly. "Were you the one who offered me water outside?" She nodded. He smiled faintly. "You're not fired. You're promoted. You remembered humanity when others forgot." The rest of the staff stood speechless. Ethan then addressed everyone. "Compassion is free, yet you chose arrogance. This hotel needs rebuilding, not in structure, but in spirit." As security escorted the fired employees out, the air grew heavy. Ethan walked back to the reception desk and sat down in the same spot where he had been humiliated earlier. The difference now was stark. Every eye in the room was fixed on him with awe and guilt. He whispered, "Respect cannot be taught through rules. It must come from the heart." A few moments later, he called the media team and ordered, "Post the footage publicly. Let the world see what happens when kindness disappears." Within hours, the video went viral. Comments flooded in. Thousands praised Ethan for exposing workplace arrogance. Finally, someone powerful stood up for dignity, one user wrote. But for Ethan, it wasn't about popularity. He watched the video silently from his office and thought of his late mother, who had once worked as a cleaner in a hotel. She used to say, "How you treat the small people shows how big your heart is," he murmured. The next morning, Ethan returned to the hotel. This time, not as a guest, not as a spy, but as a leader determined to rebuild. He gathered the remaining loyal staff and said, "We're starting over. From now on, this place will welcome every soul with equal respect." He arranged training sessions, better working conditions, and introduced an anonymous feedback system so no one could be silenced again. Slowly, the atmosphere changed. Smiles returned. Genuine ones. Weeks later, the same receptionist who had been fired came to meet him. She looked different, humble, tearful, and carrying a letter. "Sir," she said, "thank you for teaching me the hardest lesson of my life." Ethan accepted the letter quietly. Inside, she had written, "You changed my heart, not just my career." He simply said, "Then my purpose wasn't wasted." Months later, Grand Monarch Hotel became a global example of compassion in hospitality. The story of the undercover boss who exposed arrogance and replaced it with empathy spread worldwide. Ethan often visited the hotel quietly, dressed in plain clothes again, not to test anyone, but to remind himself how it all began. One evening, as he stood by the same glass doors, watching the sunset reflect off the polished floor, a young bellboy approached him with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir." "Welcome home." Ethan smiled back. This time no one laughed, no one judged. The hotel had changed, and so had he. Weeks turned into months, and the legend of the undercover boss began spreading far beyond the walls of the Grand Monarch Hotel. Journalists from all over the world wanted interviews. Influencers called Ethan a visionary leader, a man who didn't just talk about empathy, he proved it. Yet amidst the global attention, Ethan remained remarkably quiet. He never sought fame. His eyes were always on the people. One chilly evening, he called a special meeting in the Grand Ballroom, the same hall where countless high-profile events had once taken place. The chandeliers glowed softly above the newly polished marble floors, and the room smelled faintly of jasmine candles. His employees, now wearing crisp uniforms and genuine smiles, filled the hall with anticipation. Ethan stood on the small stage and looked at them, not as workers, but as a family reborn through truth. "6 months ago," he began, his voice calm but full of emotion, This hotel stood tall but hollow. Today it stands humble but alive. His words resonated through the silence. When I came here undercover, I wanted to test your hospitality. But instead, I found a lesson for myself. That leadership means listening, not watching from above. Several employees had tears in their eyes, remembering how far they'd come from that humiliating day. Ethan continued, "The world might remember the moment I fired half the staff, but I'll remember the moment I saw humanity return to this place." The crowd applauded softly, not in forced respect, but in gratitude. He smiled and motioned to the side, where the young housekeeper, the same one who had offered him water months ago, stepped forward in her new role as assistant manager. The room erupted in cheers. "She represents what this company truly stands for," Ethan said proudly. "Kindness first, position later." He paused, glancing toward the glass walls where city lights shimmered outside. "Every person who walks through those doors, whether rich or poor, deserves dignity. That is our luxury." The speech ended not with grand music or media cameras, but with silence, the kind that comes from hearts deeply moved. Ethan walked down from the stage and shook hands with each employee personally. He noticed how their eyes, once anxious and guarded, now carried warmth and pride. As the night ended, he stepped out onto the hotel terrace where the city breeze touched his face. He whispered to himself, "Power isn't in wealth. It's in the courage to be human." For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt peace, not the peace of success, but the peace of purpose fulfilled. Months after the shocking incident, Ethan decided to visit the Monarch again, this time without cameras, disguises, or entourage. As he entered, the same lobby that had once echoed with arrogance now pulsed with calm hospitality. The scent of fresh lilies replaced the old synthetic air freshener. Maria stood behind the counter, dressed in a royal blue blazer, assisting an elderly couple with a smile so genuine that even the marble walls seemed brighter. She noticed Ethan, froze for a second, then ran up to greet him. "Sir, welcome back." He smiled softly. "I came as a guest this time, Maria, not as a boss." She laughed, her voice warm. Around them, new staff members worked harmoniously, greeting guests, carrying luggage, ensuring every detail was perfect. The transformation was complete not because of money, but because kindness had become the hotel's foundation. Once Ethan walked through the grand corridors, every polished tile reflecting the golden light of dusk streaming through glass ceilings. The once arrogant staff had been replaced with a team that moved like a family, respectful, focused, and kind. He paused near the lobby's center, where a large plaque now hung on the wall. It read, "The heart of hospitality is humanity, dedicated to those who serve with kindness." Beneath it, Maria's name was engraved in shining letters. A quiet pride filled his chest. He recalled the day he had watched her get humiliated for defending him, thinking how the tables had turned, from her being dismissed to becoming the very soul of the hotel. The pianist near the fountain played a soft melody. Guests chatted peacefully, and the scent of freshly baked bread floated from the cafe nearby. Ethan realized that true luxury wasn't gold, chandeliers, or marble floors. It was dignity, respect, and heart. Later that evening, Maria joined Ethan at the rooftop terrace. The city below shimmered with lights, and the night breeze carried the sound of laughter from the hotel's newly opened lounge. "I never imagined I'd be standing here again," she said softly, gazing at the skyline. Ethan smiled, sipping his coffee. "I didn't imagine I'd find someone who reminded me why I built this place in the first place." She turned toward him, surprised. "You built the Monarch?" He nodded, eyes distant. 15 years ago. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what it meant. The people running it forgot that hospitality means heart, not hierarchy." Maria looked thoughtful. Maybe it took losing everything to find it again. Their shared silence carried more truth than words. Two people who'd seen both cruelty and kindness, now standing at the intersection of redemption and purpose. The next morning, Ethan called for a staff meeting. The entire team gathered in the ballroom, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. He stepped onto the stage and looked at the faces before him. Young, old, nervous, hopeful. "A few months ago," he began, This hotel forgot what service truly means. It became a place where smiles were fake and hearts were closed. But today I look at all of you and I see change. Real hospitality starts with compassion. The crowd listened intently. Maria stood near the front, her eyes glistening. From this day, he continued, the monarch will not just be a symbol of wealth. It will be a symbol of warmth. The room erupted into applause, not for the boss who returned, but for the man who understood that success without empathy is failure in disguise. Weeks passed, and the monarch became the talk of the city again, not for its luxury, but for its story. Guests posted reviews online praising the service, sharing how employees went above and beyond. It feels like family here, one wrote. The news spread, and soon even journalists arrived to cover the transformation. During an interview, Maria said, "It's not about one man changing everything. It's about one moment reminding everyone who we really are." Ethan watched from the side, proud but humbled. The interviewer turned to him. "Mr. Blake, as the founder, how do you feel seeing this rebirth?" Ethan smiled and replied, "Rebirths are beautiful, but only when they come from the heart." Cameras clicked, capturing the moment. The once undercover boss now standing beside the woman whose kindness had rebuilt an empire. That evening, Ethan took a quiet walk through the garden behind the hotel. Lanterns lined the pathway, the air filled with the scent of jasmine. He stopped near the fountain where he had once sat disguised, cleaning tables, unnoticed and judged. Now the same place sparkled with life. Children played near the water, their parents laughing at nearby tables. A violinist performed softly under a tree. Ethan closed his eyes, hearing not just the music, but the echo of his journey. From humiliation to understanding, from power to empathy. The lesson was clear. True leadership isn't about being served, but about serving others first. One late night, Maria found Ethan in the lobby, still working. "You don't rest, do you?" she teased, holding 2 cups of tea. He smiled. "When your heart's full, sleep takes a back seat." She sat beside him, setting the cups down. "You know," she said, "people talk about how you changed everything, but maybe you didn't change anything. You just reminded us what mattered." Ethan looked at her, thoughtful. "Maybe you reminded me first." The clock chimed softly as they sipped their tea. 2 souls connected not by power or position, but by purpose. The world outside slept, but inside the monarch, peace finally lived. Months later, Ethan launched a scholarship under Maria's name, the Heart of Service, dedicated to helping young hospitality workers from underprivileged backgrounds study and grow in the field. The first award ceremony was emotional. Students cried, families clapped, and Maria stood speechless when Ethan handed her the plaque. "You turned my mistake into meaning," he told her. Cameras flashed, capturing her tears as she whispered, "No, sir, you turned my humiliation into hope." The applause that followed filled the grand hall like a wave, rising high into the chandeliers and echoing against the marble walls, a sound of transformation that no one would ever forget. Soon after, the monarch became a symbol far beyond its city. Other hotel chains called Ethan for advice. Universities invited Maria as a speaker to talk about leadership and kindness. One day during an international conference, a student asked her, "Do you believe in second chances?" Maria smiled. "I believe in eyes that see beyond appearances. Because one kind act can change everything. Even a heart of stone can remember how to feel." The crowd rose to its feet, applauding not just her words, but the truth behind them. The power of simple humanity in a world obsessed with prestige. Ethan's story reached millions. A documentary crew even recreated his undercover journey, showing how a single decision to go undercover transformed hundreds of lives. Watching it premiere on television, Ethan sat quietly in his living room. No fancy suits or cameras this time. Just peace. When the credits rolled, his eyes glistened. The last frame showed Maria smiling behind the counter, with a quote at the bottom, "Kindness is the only luxury that never goes out of style." He whispered the line to himself, knowing that those words would outlive him, echoing through every guest who entered his hotel. Years later, a young woman entered the monarch carrying a small suitcase. She looked around in awe, eyes shining with wonder. Maria, now the general manager, approached her warmly. "Welcome to the Monarch. First time here?" The girl smiled nervously. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here for my first job interview." Maria saw herself in that young face. The same hope, the same fear. "Then you're already halfway there," she said kindly. In the office above, Ethan watched the exchange through the glass window, a proud smile spreading across his face. The legacy was alive. The boss who once went undercover had built more than a hotel. He had built a home where respect was the currency, and kindness the only rule, again. A few months later, the Monarch was chosen to host an international charity gala. Dignitaries, celebrities, and philanthropists gathered under its grand chandeliers, all unaware that the man standing modestly near the back, in a simple suit, without guards or press, was the very billionaire who had once been thrown out of his own lobby. Ethan preferred it that way. He watched Maria move gracefully through the crowd, greeting guests with that same genuine smile that had once cost her a job. The violinists played a soft symphony, while waiters served champagne. Then the lights dimmed as a large screen lit up with the story of the hotel's transformation, from arrogance to empathy, from greed to grace. When Maria's image appeared standing up to injustice, the crowd broke into applause. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The story that began with humiliation had now become a legacy of honor. After the gala, reporters surrounded Maria for interviews. She was asked how it felt to be part of such a powerful story. "It feels like life gave me a second chance," she said softly. "But the truth is, sometimes people don't need a second chance. They just need to be seen for who they truly are." Her words went viral that night. Social media filled with clips of her interview, hashtags spreading across platforms. Ethan watched it from his office upstairs. For years, his wealth had built skyscrapers. But now, it was Maria's kindness that built bridges between hearts. He realized that fame and power fade, but compassion creates an echo that time can't silence. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the hotel addressed to Ethan. The handwriting was uneven, the envelope slightly torn. Inside, he found a note from an elderly man who wrote, "I used to work at a small inn. I was fired for helping a poor family who couldn't pay. Watching your story reminded me that I wasn't wrong. I was just early." Ethan read the letter twice, his eyes moistening. He placed it on his desk and whispered, "You weren't early, old man. You were right." That night he couldn't sleep. He decided to start a global foundation to support small businesses that practiced humanity before profit, a movement that would become known as the Monarch Initiative. The initiative grew faster than he imagined. Dozens of struggling hotels, cafes, and inns received grants and mentorship programs funded by the Monarch Group. Ethan personally visited some of them. No cameras, no media, just him walking in quietly and listening. One afternoon, he visited a small coastal inn run by a widow named Mrs. Lane. She told him, "People come and go, but kindness stays in the air like the scent of coffee." Ethan smiled, realizing those were almost the same words Maria had once said. The walls of the inn were cracked, but the warmth inside made it feel like home. He returned to his car and looked out at the ocean, whispering, This is what it's all about." Back in the city, the Monarch prepared for another milestone, its 10th anniversary since reopening. The theme was the power of second chances. Maria oversaw the event planning, ensuring every detail carried meaning. Ethan, as always, kept his presence subtle, letting her lead. On the evening of the celebration, guests arrived dressed elegantly, the hotel glowing with golden lights that reflected on the glass facade. Maria opened the event with a heartfelt speech. "When we stand up for what's right, even when no one is watching, we plant seeds that grow into miracles." Her voice trembled slightly, but the conviction behind it was unshakable. The applause that followed was thunderous. It wasn't for a hotel, but for a philosophy that had changed lives. Later that night, as the party continued, Ethan stood on the rooftop terrace once more, the city skyline stretching infinitely before him. Maria joined him quietly, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. 10 years, she said softly. "Feels like a lifetime ago when I was wiping tables." He chuckled. "And I was pretending to be a janitor." They both laughed, a sound full of history and healing. After a pause, Ethan said, "You know, I used to think success was about power. Now I know it's about peace." Maria nodded, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "And peace," she replied, "comes when you forgive the past and build something better." The wind carried her words away like a promise. Not long after, a young journalist visited Ethan for a documentary follow-up. She asked, "Mr. Blake, what was your biggest lesson through all this?" Ethan leaned back, thoughtful. "That people remember how you make them feel, not what you make them do. Money can buy walls, but only respect can build trust." She smiled, writing it down. Then she asked, "And Maria?" His expression softened. "Maria reminded me that one act of courage can change everything. She taught me what leadership truly means." The journalist looked up, saying quietly, "That sounds like love." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's something stronger, it's gratitude." Years passed. Maria eventually opened her own leadership academy with Ethan's support, a place where young people from around the world learned empathy-based management. The walls of the academy were covered with photos of the monarch's transformation. Every hallway carried quotes about kindness, perseverance, and dignity. On the opening day, Ethan walked through the doors as an honored guest, greeted by applause from students. Maria handed him a keys, a symbolic gesture. "For opening the doors that changed all our lives," she said. Ethan looked around, humbled beyond words. He had built skyscrapers before, but this was his proudest creation. In his later years, Ethan began to step away from the limelight, preferring quiet mornings in his countryside home. One day, Maria visited him with a small team of academy students. They sat under a tree listening to his stories. "Never underestimate the value of humility," he told them. "The moment you believe you're above someone, you've already fallen below them." The students wrote down his words eagerly. Before they left, Maria hugged him and whispered, "You changed the world by being human." He smiled. "No, Maria, we changed it together." That afternoon, as they drove away, Ethan stayed on the porch, watching the horizon with peaceful eyes. The once restless businessman had finally found serenity. When Ethan passed away a few years later, the monarch held a memorial in his honor. Thousands attended, employees, guests, and even strangers who had been touched by his legacy. Maria, now gray-haired but strong, stood before the crowd and said, "He came as a boss but left as a believer, in people, in kindness, in change." The lights dimmed, and on the massive screen, a black and white image appeared of Ethan smiling in his janitor uniform, mop in hand. The crowd rose for a standing ovation, tears and smiles blending under the glow of chandeliers. And outside, above the hotel that started it all, the city lights flickered softly, as if the world itself was bowing in gratitude.